Hey folks, I'm Jack Watson, full-time UI UX designer, illustrator, animator, donut connoisseur, and your host for today's Illustrator Skills Challenge. Today's going to be a laid-back challenge. We're going to be talking about accessibility, how you can check that your work meets certain criteria, and creating a style guide for accessible design. Before we get started, check the links in the description below this video. We've got a bunch of stuff down there, links to our other creative communities on Discord, other challenges, as well as a link to the starter file to get working with us today. So I'm going to switch over to that starter file. There we go. So hopping over to Illustrator, I've got notes off to the side here, as well as a single artboard as usual. Today's resources are geared towards accessibility, learning about accessibility guidelines. Like I said, you can go in a real deep dive about the topic if you would like. Most of these guidelines are going to be around web design or designing for screens. But you can use these guidelines not just for screens, not limited to just that. But I use them for like working on illustrations, branding, graphic design, for checking contrast, making sure my elements all have good visual hierarchy, and that my fonts are legible. So all those things are important no matter if you're working for the web, for print, for screens, etc. So we will start our journey off today on actually color.adobe.com, which I've got a link to in the resources. Specifically, I've got a link to the accessibility tools. We're just going to start out in the basic create panel here, create tab. And you can use these color rules. We looked at the explore and trends if you want some help picking color palettes, but you can also kind of just use these. See how these different color rules create different kind of color palettes for you. They kind of link and connect to each other here, so you can kind of move them around and see how you can get different color palettes just with this tool here. Kind of feel free to explore and figure out how the different rules work together here by adjusting these little circles around here, spreading them out, and seeing how they're kind of connected. I like to pick the complementary options because I get like a good range of colors. It's going to be a theme for today. We're going to be trying to create a nice range of values, a nice range of hues, a nice range of saturations to work with, give us a lot of options when we're working with a limited color palette like this. So once you kind of come across something that you like, up here in the Save To, you're going to want to make sure that you know where you're saving your library to. So make sure you specify if you've already got one that you want to save it to. I've got this AI Challenges one kind of set that it's going to save to. Or you can make a new library by clicking the little plus up there and type it out. Just make sure that you know where you saved it to, so you can go back to the original in library that you saved it to once you get into Illustrator. You can also name it if you want to. You can publish it if you wanted to have it show up in the Explorer or the Trends. But down here, this is an important one you want to check before we save our color palette. We can actually check it right here either by clicking on this tab, but if we click here, it's going to take us right to this color blindness kind of simulator down here. So you can see down here that if you get a conflict, if you've got two colors that are a little bit too close together, it's actually going to give you a warning by indicating with these little lines and then show you in the colorblind simulator where you've got an issue. And if you've got two colors that are too close when you're looking at the simulator here, all you have to do is kind of go back up to the top and just kind of drag these circles out until you get more contrast between your colors. So you can see I just kind of moved one of those colors that was causing an issue, B here, out a little bit, and it's going to fix that issue for us. We can actually bring it, so we've got even more contrast, just bring it closer together. And you can see down here what you're kind of looking for with these color blindness simulators is if somebody was not looking at my colors and they were just looking, you know, this is what they saw, would they be able to visually distinguish these colors, separate them out from each other? Alright, so we're actually going to leave here for the time being. We're going to save our color palette out by clicking save. It's going to save to our challenges library. And then before we get back over to Illustrator, I do also want to pick some fonts. So we're going to be looking at fonts, or we're going to be looking at how type and how colors work together today. You could just focus on colors, but I think it's important to kind of like show them in conjunction if you're working on branding, like I said, or graphic design stuff in general. So normally on Adobe Fonts, I will click all fonts and I'll just kind of peruse through here and take a look at fonts and kind of pick them on an individual level. Feel free to go ahead and do that. You've also got a recommendations tab just like you've got in color.adobe.com, where you can get those different color libraries and stuff like that. But the nice thing about this recommendations tab, and why I would recommend you take a look over here, is that you get to see these little font pairings. So interspersed with these lovely like graphic representations of the fonts, you'll also see that you've got these font pairings, and these are really helpful just to kind of look at and see how, I'll expand the window out so we can get them a little bit larger, see how they pair these different fonts together. So typically you'll see as you're scrolling through that these headlines, which are really short, larger text, are going to be the fun fonts. Those are going to be the ones that got like fancy serifs on them, etc. Those are usually bolder, they're more, they're like display typefaces. But the other text, the text that's kind of smaller down here, these are usually plainer fonts, simpler. They're usually like a sans serif or a serif that doesn't have a lot of fancy accents on it. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure that our body copy, because it's smaller, is going to be easier to read. And these display fonts, while they're fun and they have a purpose, the text that you pick for this longer, smaller copy, we call this body copy, we want to make sure that those are a little bit plainer, a little bit, so that they read when you're reading across like a paragraph of text. It's easier to kind of read through that. You don't have to struggle with the fun fonts. Anyways, the fun fonts, though, have their purpose, like I said. If you are scanning a document, if your user is scanning a document, you want them to be able to pick out those headlines as they're scanning. So if they're looking for something in particular, like an FAQ, and they want to find their question, they're very easily able to kind of scan and find those short, very short, like no longer than a sentence kind of headlines there, and pick them out. So for today, I'm just going to go ahead and pick one of these to work with, but Wade in our live chat says, well, fun fonts are fun. Yeah, it's very true. But I'm just going to pick one of these font pairings. Just keep this in mind when you're picking fonts on your own. Try to follow this. Easy to read, plain sans serif for small body copy, and then use a large contrasting font for your headlines. That's just kind of like a general kind of rule of thumb. So let's just pick one of these. Kind of like, that's too fun. We're not going to go with that one. We'll go with this. This is a good contrast. Alright, now we're going to hop back over to Illustrator. We're going to start to put together our guide here. So we've got this artboard here. We're going to put together a color and font guide for ourselves to be able to use if you're using this for illustration or for branding or anything really. It will give you a nice palette to kind of choose from. So opening up my libraries panel, if you don't see it, it's going to be under Window and Libraries down here. If you open that up, you're probably going to either see this view, or if we go back out, you're going to be seeing this view. You're just going to want to find the name of your library and click into it. If you don't see it or you're in some other library, you're going to click this back arrow, and then you'll be able to navigate to where you saved it. And you can see I've got a bunch of stuff in here from past challenges, but I'm just going to start by going and finding, I don't know, I think this was my color palette, maybe. We're just going to right click and we're going to add this theme to our swatches. So I can right click on my color theme and I can either add the color to swatches or I can add the whole theme, and I want to add the whole theme. So it's going to add a folder over there in my swatches panel, and I can just kind of minimize this now so it's kind of out of the way. Now we'll just drag out some color swatches on my artboard so we can kind of test them out in Illustrator. So I'm going to switch over to the shape tool now. The rectangle tool over here. If you don't see your rectangle, just click and hold down to get to it in the shapes menu. I'm just going to drag out, holding down shift to make a square. Square to start. Eric says, guess what I did? I just activated all 4 fields display. Thank you, Jack. Oh, I'm glad you found a font that you liked. I think that's a font. Anyways, if you want to join us on our live chat on Behance or on YouTube, we've got a live chat every day at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. You can let me know what fonts you like, or let me know what you're working on, ask questions, or just hang out with the community. Alright, with my square selected, I'm actually going to go over and I'm going to start applying my colors to this. So it's got a white fill currently. You can see I've got the fill selected in front, and I'm just going to go over to my swatches and click to apply my first color. I don't need any a stroke today. You could use strokes, but I'm actually going to not use them. So I'm going to click to bring it to the front, And then either in any of these places where you see a white box with a line through it that says none, when you hover over it in your swatches panel, for example, we're just going to set the swatch or the stroke to have no color. And then I'm going to remember to bring my fill color back to the front so I can continue to add these colors here. So I've got, before we get any farther, I've got smart guides on under view smart guides. That's what you see kind of like hopping all over the place as I'm dragging. They're going to come in handy closer to the end, but if you want to go ahead and turn them on now, you can find them under the view panel at the top, the view menu. Alright, I need to create a square for each one of my colors, so I'm going to drag out, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I can just drag out some copies by holding down Shift, Alt, and dragging. So I'm just holding down the Shift key and the Alt option, you can see up at the top there, and just dragging to make a bunch of copies. We're going to make 5 in total, 1 for each of our colors. And then I'm going to go through selecting each of them and make sure that I've got my fill color applied to them. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now we know that we had a good setup to begin with this, with our color checker in color.adobe.com, but there's another kind of color check that I like to do in Illustrator, and that's I like to check my values. So I talked about having a good range. We're going to test that now. I'm going to drag out another set here, holding down Shift and Alt or Option to drag out a copy, and I'm doing this because I want to show you a comparison. You could do this, you don't have to make a copy, but for comparison purposes. I've got my copy, and I'm going to go to Edit, Edit Colors, and I'm going to convert this to grayscale. And the reason I want to do this is I want to take a look at the overall values, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to see. The colors can be a little bit distracting. And so I like to kind of make a copy here and just kind of look at what they look like in grayscale without getting caught up in the hue and saturation. And I can see that I kind of want to make an adjustment probably to these two because they're very close together. And then I probably also want to make an adjustment to these two because they're very close together. And so up here, I'm just going to kind of modify my existing colors by clicking the first one and then going in here. And when I'm in the color picker, there's actually a logic to this. If I drag left to right, that's going to affect the saturation. If I drag from the top to bottom, that's going to affect the value. And so in this case, I want to darken the color. I want to increase the value, so I'm going to drag down. And if I drag down, straight down, it's going to be okay, right? It's going to darken our color, but it starts to look a little bit muddy. And so if you want to bring back a little bit of that color, you're going to want to also drag to the right. So you kind of get something that's a little bit more, it's got like increased saturation and darkness, so we kind of keep the personality of the color, I guess. So we got this kind of dark maroon now. And then, like I said, I also think these two colors are a little bit close. But if I make this one darker, I'm afraid that it's going to get closer to this color here. So what I'm going to do for these two to separate them is I'm actually going to make it lighter instead. So double clicking on my fill color, this time I'm going to bring it across to the opposite side. Since I've already got the light, I've already got it all the way as light as it can be. I'm going to drag it to the left to decrease the saturation, and that's going to lighten this for us. And I'm going to hit OK. And now if I just kind of drag these down, I drag out another copy here. So make sure I've got the right keyboard shortcut held, holding down Shift and Alt. If I go up here to Edit Colors, and change this to grayscale, you can see it's a little bit subtle, but now we've got more contrast, especially between these two colors here. So it just kind of, we could lighten this one a little bit more, but we've got more contrast than we originally started, right? Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hop briefly back over to the Adobe Color accessibility tools, but I'm going to take a screenshot first. I'm going to hold down Shift, Command, and 4 to take a screenshot on my Mac. You can use the snipping tool if you're on Windows, or you can just copy the actual hex values. If I click on my fill here, double click to get the color picker. On the bottom next to this octothorpe down here, you can see you can actually copy the hex code, and you can paste it into the color checker on Adobe Color. We do need to talk a little bit, switching over into our accessibility tools and going to contrast checker here. I do want to take a minute here to talk about what's happening on this site. So there's a lot of things going on. the way that this works is it's using this WCAG 2.1 level up here. It's using this as the guideline. That's what we're using as our guidelines. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's just a set of standards for contrast on the web. But like I said, this applies to kind of everything. So Adobe's Contrast Checker is using recommendations for AA and AAA, which are levels of accessibility criteria that you can go for. There's actually 3, single A, double A, and triple A. Triple A being the highest, and double A being kind of like a nice middle ground. I would recommend aiming for that. For this, if you're just kind of getting started, it's a good kind of mid-level. If you're doing something for like educational resources, you should aim higher, probably for that triple A. But for us, for today, a double A is going to be just fine. And if you need to, you can click on this little question mark to get some more information on how this is working. This is working by a this contrast ratio over here. So each level has a different contrast ratio requirement, and that's based on the luminance, relative luminance of each color, as well as the font size, or the text size. So the text size is going to affect this equation, as well as the luminance. So on the left side, we've got the text luminance, followed by a colon, and then on the right side, we've got the background luminance. And so we want to make sure that for a double A, we want to make sure that this contrast ratio is 3 to 1. So 3 for the text luminance to a 1 for the background luminance. And then that's going to be for large text. And then for smaller text, we actually need an even higher contrast ratio. So we'll need a 4.5 to 1 luminance. So our text will either need to be 3 or 4.5. And then our background is going to be 1. So it's just a comparison between our background and our text to make sure that we've got good contrast between those two. You don't really need to remember all this information because Adobe Color makes it really easy for you. You can see in here that you get a little negative or a little crossed out circle here if you don't meet the contrast ratio for the level that you've chosen. And you also get these little suggestions over here that you can actually apply, and it'll give you suggestions based on your background color, kind of manipulating it in order for you to get the contrast ratio that you need in order for your text to be legible over your backgrounds. But we took a screenshot, and with that we can actually import our colors. So I'm just going to drag it in here. And when you do that, you're going to get these little pickers here, and you can kind of click whichever kind of colors you want to start with. I'm only going to use one color. It actually compares the colors against each other, but I only really need my background color for mine today. And everybody's laughing at Octothorpe in the chat. It's the pound sign, you guys. Anyways, I'm going to be checking this against black and white because I only want to see this against values. So I want to see if my background color works with lighter text or it works with darker text. So I'm just going to switch this to be white, and you can see that that passes with flying colors. If I wanted this to work on with dark text over it, like I really needed to for a brand, for example, like this color has to work with dark colors, I'm going to need to adjust this color a lot. You can see even bringing the luminance way up doesn't quite cut it. So what you would need to do is you'd need to go over here, and you'd actually need to apply one of these recommendations. If I just click on that, you can see that it pulls the color way, way brighter, and so that it stands out with a good contrast ratio for my text color. I'm not going to go through and do all of my colors today. I just wanted to kind of show you that this is how you would go through and you kind of figure out which of your colors are going to work with dark text, which of your colors are going to work with light text. Do I need to go in here and then copy out, like if I need to change a color, I can just hit Command-C to copy that hex code. And then I can go back into my swatches and I can double click in here and I can paste it in if I needed to change that color. So that's how you kind of go through. We can pretend that we did all of that. And now I'm ready to kind of set up my guide. So I've got colors, they work well, we've checked them for color blindness simulation, we've checked them for good values with grayscale. I'm just going to drag them next to each other. And this is how I would put together a nice color palette for a project that I was beginning, that I needed to have text and colors, and also like I'm only want to work with these 5 colors. How do I get a good range? So I've just selected them all and I've dragged them all together and I've moved them up to the corner using smart guides. And now with my selection tool, everything's selected, I'm just going to scale them across. So this is going to be my starting point. And then I'm going to make a copy of all of these and make 4 rows. So why 4? So I'm starting with 100% of my color, and I'm going to make tints. And I like to use numbers like 20 or 25 because they're really divisible by 100, or vice versa. They break down, and so I can create nice kind of like steps. So there's one thing I need to do, by the way, that I almost forgot. I need to add these as swatches. So we have them down here, right, as our original import, but I actually want to add these a second time now that I've made changes to them to create a new kind of like fixed color palette. So we'll drag to select all of these, and I can add all of my colors at once to my swatches panel by clicking on this little folder icon down here with all of my colors selected. And when I do that, this time I'm going to make sure I've got convert process to global. Global swatches let me adjust the color tint slider, which we'll look at in a second, which lets me get percentages of color so I can get lighter and lighter as I go down. So I'm going to hit OK. And you can tell that this is a global swatch because it has a little triangle in the corner, if you can see that. Little triangles next to them. Those are global swatches. So holding down Alt and Shift using that same trick, I'm just going to drag a whole bunch of copies out. Like I said, I'm going to drag 4 because I'm going to make these have tints that are divisible by 4. So I've selected all of my colors. I'm going to fill the artboard. And up here in the color window, if you don't see any of these palettes or any of these panels, they're going to be in your Windows drop down. So if you don't see color, it's just going to be right here. Here I can actually adjust, you can see the tint. So if I bring it down, I'll get a lower tint, so I'll get less color. And if I bring it up, I'm going to get more. But you can also adjust these globally for all of the things you have selected. And so if I drag this and I just select this whole lower set, you can see I can start to do my math. I've got 100 at the top. This next is going to be 75, and then we're going to do 50, and then 25. So you've got a nice range of values that break down divisible by, in 25% increments. So over here you can see I've got multiple colors, so it's giving me this little like, I don't know what this is. But I can still adjust my tints because they're all swatches, so I can just type 75, and it's going to do all of those. I'll drag to select the set below, and I'll do 50. And then finally this bottom set here, and 25. And now, once we've got all of our, oh, Sean's saying, oh, maths, yeah. Now that we've got all of our colors in here, we can start to add our colors, remembering we learned about color rules, right? So I'll just click to create some point text. I honestly don't remember what our font was that we picked, so I'm just going to pick a nice display looking font here, a nice bold font. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to change it to a heavier weight so we can actually see it. That might be too large. Remembering that this is going to be our headline text, so we want it to be nice and bold. And remembering also what we learned about color contrast. So we know that we tested this color and it needs to be white because only white text is going to stand out over this darker color. Command C and Command F to copy and paste our text, and we'll change this to our body font. Let's just say it's Avenir, and we'll bring it down in size to be smaller. So now we can kind of look and do a comparison, and we can do this across all of our colors. So I'm gonna just hold down Shift to select both my headline text and my body text, holding down Option and Shift to drag. Now remember, this color, I need to change this to be black. And I would just go across here, and I would just kind of add these across all of these, going across the top, making sure that I've got good contrast based on what I learned on Adobe Color with these color comparisons with their type. And then you're going to go down going the same way. So you're going to kind of make sure that, like, when you're working on a design, then you can say, okay, I've got this background color. I know that this is the color that I need to use over top. I need to use dark text. And it might change as you go down. So for example here, this one, I would probably change this to black. So as you go down in the tints, you're going to be changing between dark text or light text, kind of always keeping in mind things like that. And then you can also do a comparison of your values for your individual colors as well. Sometimes I'll add like a little circle in here with a mid-tone, a black, and a white, so I can know, okay, this color, you know, darks and lights work over this, but not mid-tones, if that makes sense. So there's lots of different ways you can kind of set this up and explore. Once you're ready for some feedback, you're going to export this and upload it to you're going to export for screens, either a PNG or a JPEG, and you're going to upload it to our Discord in the Daily Creative Challenge DCC feedback channel here to get some feedback and see what everybody from the community is working on. Unfortunately, we got through everything, but that's going to be all that we can get to today. I hope you enjoy this challenge. It's really important. It's something that I have to do every day as a UI UX designer. We went over a lot of stuff: colors, fonts, setting up a swatch guide in Illustrator. We're live every day at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on behance.net/Adobe Live and on the Adobe Live YouTube channel. Stay here. There's more awesome live streams coming up after me. Bye, everyone.